Hello, everybody. This is Hannah Park. I'm Matt Hardy at the beginning right now because he had a conflict. Hopefully he'll be able to join us in a minute. But we're gonna get started in just a minute or so. We're seeing people still coming on, so we want to give people a chance to settle in before we get started. All right, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, this is Hannah Park from SpyPalm Partners. To all of you joining us on the line, welcome. This is webinar 49 in our Transportation Asset Management webinar series sponsored by FHWA and AASHTO. This is also the fourth installment in a special TRB, I've been doing too much TRB last month, a special TAM webinar mini-series. The purpose of this mini-series is to take a deeper dive into the topic of improving the next TAMP, as many of you are embarking on the development of the next TAMP that's due in 2022. We've been delivering these mini-series webinars more frequently in order to build momentum and increase engagement. The next installment in the mini-series will be held next Wednesday, February 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's going to be our 50th webinar. We'll have a big celebration planned, so you don't want to miss it. The topic is going to be on improving risk management and resiliency. The final session, which will be to look at the TAM maturity levels from the FHWA 2019 TAMP reviews, will be scheduled soon. So last week, the webinar provided an overview of TAM financial plans and asset valuation in the context of building your TAMP. We heard from some great speakers and had an excellent Q&A as part of that session. If you missed it, I encourage you to look it up on the AASHTO TAM portal. There you'll find more information on this webinar series, so just visit tam-portal.com and click Events in the main menu, and there you'll register for upcoming webinars as they're announced. Just today, I was looking back at the webinar from August 2020, which was a webinar 45, because I was looking at the presentation that Steve Barnhardt did from the city of Seattle, where he did a presentation on their equity tool. The links to the video and slides from today's webinar will be posted on this site. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics or have questions for the presenters during today's webinar, please submit your comments or questions using the webinar's Q&A feature in the menu bar. We'll answer all of the questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We're leaving extra time for Q&A today, and we're looking forward to your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to Steve Gay for a welcome on behalf of our co-sponsor, FHWA.
Thank you, Yana. FHWA is a proud sponsor of this webinar series in cooperation with AASHTO. This series is first and foremost an opportunity to share practical, useful, timely information with the asset management community. So I'm glad to see so many of you are returning from our last webinar in this mini-series, and we're looking forward to seeing you on many more in the future. We have a great program today, the fourth in our mini-series on improving your next TAMP. As you know, life cycle planning and management are at the heart of asset management and of your asset management plan. I know many of you have heard me say recently, hey, have you walked down the hall and had your pavement management or your pavement management person run the data? Have you looked at your deterioration curves? Have you put the new data in there? All those sort of things. Because I strongly encourage you to do that. We're going to hear today from practitioners who share some of their experiences and insights. And we'll also hear from the consultant team behind some of the research that's been helping us advance the state of the practice. I think you're going to enjoy today's presentations and discussion, and I hope we'll all learn a lot this afternoon. I'm really looking forward to it. And please don't hesitate. Ask questions. I think it's really important. At this point, I'm going to turn it back to Yana.
Thanks, Steve. So the purpose of the webinar series is to share lessons learned, ideas, and knowledge with the asset management community, building working knowledge of key concepts and definitions relevant to lifecycle planning and management, building to apply this knowledge in order to answer the following questions. What opportunities exist to strengthen lifecycle planning and to improve the next TAMP? What benefits can my agency expect by strengthening the lifecycle planning process? What are the key lessons learned from the first round of TAMP development that can help improve lifecycle planning and management and the next TAMP? We're hoping you'll use the webinar Q&A panel to share your questions for the presenter on these and other topics today. So for the agenda today, Steve will kick off the webinar with a topic introduction. Next, we'll have Katie Zimmerman of Applied Pavement Technology, who will provide an overview of the FHWA Lifecycle Handbook. After Katie, our next presentation features Suri Sadam from WSP, who will share the progress that's being made on the NCHRP 2-26 implementation of programmatic lifecycle cost analysis in a TAM framework research project. Then we'll hear from Ken Valentine of VTrans, the Vermont Agency of Transportation, who will be sharing what Vermont is doing to improve lifecycle planning and management. And Thor Anderson of Arizona DOT will conclude our presentations today with ADOT's lifecycle planning practices and continuous improvement approach. So just another reminder, please submit your comments and questions using the Q&A feature. And in response to the most frequently asked questions, yes, we will make the slides and video available after today's webinar at tam-portal.com. The slides are available now on your menu bar, so you can download the slides if you want to follow along as we go through today's agenda. So first up is Steve Gay with our topic introduction.
Thank you, Yana. I know, I'll say this, the whole issue of life cycle plans seemed to be a new term that many of us saw when you saw the regs for asset management plans. Many of us are familiar with life cycle cost analysis, which is generally focused on a project. Life cycle plans focusing on managing the network. And I'll say the very essence of it goes back to the very definition of asset management. And I'm paraphrasing here. Managing your network in a state of good repair at least practical cost using a structured sequence of maintenance, preservation, rehab, reconstruction, new construction. I think that's the essence of what we're doing here. I'm going to use a little bit of regulatory language here, and I'll explain what we were trying to capture. Is to take a look at your assets or asset subgroup, and realize that you have to manage a concrete pavement different than an asphalt pavement, etc. And as you develop the life cycle plan, also look at changes in demand and look at information about current and future environment mental conditions. You know, looking at the TAMP, I don't think I've seen too much about, you know, how much additional traffic you're expecting. But, you know, I look back at the U.S. population back when we started developing the RED back in 2012 to 2016 and compare it to the population we have today in the U.S. of about 330 million. We've grown a lot. Yeah, maybe this past year the traffic volumes have gone down, but in general, what are the expectations on our network? And continuing with the regulations, is, you know, the whole life cycle plans looking out for the whole life. And we're talking, are you talking 40 years for pavements, 50 for bridges, 75, 100? What are those issues during that time frame? Oh, and by the way, you should be looking at your short-term target as part of the TPM program. Also, what about deterioration models? I mentioned earlier the term. As you get more data with the measures you have to tweak them at all. And are things happening out there like you expect with the treatment you're putting in place, doing the 5 work types? And again, we've heard a lot of feedback from state DOTs about the 5 work types. What is that structured sequence? And I think it's really important, even tying back to last week's webinar. Okay, so looking at your network, how many miles are you going to do routine maintenance? How many miles do you need to do preservation? How many miles do you need to do rehab? And now it's really becomes a money issue too. How do you manage that network over the whole life with good life cycle planning? And at the end of the day, what are your strategies for managing each asset class? I think this is I believe last week I said the financial plan was the backbone of your plan. I don't think you can't say that also about the life cycle plan. This is where it all comes together in managing your network at least practical cost for its whole life. With that, let me turn it back to you, Yana. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Our next presentation is from Katie Zimmerman. Katie is the founder and executive vice president of Applied Pavement Technology, a civil engineering firm specializing in transportation. Katie has been very involved in the pavement and asset management communities over her career, serving in a leadership role on many projects to improve the use of data and analysis tools for managing highway assets. She has led the development of several state DOT TAMPs, authored the FHWA guidance on lifecycle planning, and teaches the course on asset management. She also recently served as co-principal investigator with me on the development of the updated Transportation Asset Management Guide available through AASHTO. Katie is a licensed engineer and a graduate of the University of Illinois, where she received both her bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering. Now I'll hand it over to Katie.
All right, thanks very much, Yana. I'm happy to be here today. This is quite an honor. So the focus of today's webinar is on ways to improve your life cycle planning process. So I'm going to kick things off talking about a recently published handbook that FHWA has available on its asset management website. So this might serve as a good resource for you if any of you are interested in finding out more about doing life cycle planning. The title of the book is shown on the slide, Using a Life Cycle Planning Process to Support Asset Management, a handbook on putting the federal guidance into practice. Today, I'm going to start with a little bit of a background on the development of the handbook itself, and then I'm going to quickly highlight some of the content from each of the major chapters in the handbook. So let's start with the background. So many of you are probably already aware that FHWA issued guidance on life cycle planning in 2017, and I included the cover from the report on the right on the slide. At the same time, they also developed guidance on risk management and financial planning. And copies of the guidance in all three of those areas are available on FHWA's website. To help with the rollout of these documents, FHWA hosted both regional and state workshops on the three topics to assist some of the states as they were developing their asset management plans. But as Steve mentioned, life cycle planning was a new concept, and FHWA was hearing from the states that they wanted additional assistance in this area. So FHWA wanted to meet that need and provide the additional assistance, and wanted to show how you can use a pavement management system or a bridge management system to implement the guidance. And so that resulted in the handbook that I'm going to be talking about today. The handbook begins with a chapter that introduces life cycle planning. It suggests that, as Steve highlighted in his introduction, that life cycle planning is really a key component of asset management, and that one of its primary goals is to establish the preferred sequence of treatments for an entire network of assets that provides not only the expected function, but it provides that at the lowest practicable life cycle cost. So there are several kind of key points in that statement. First of all, it's a network level analysis. So you're looking at a group of assets rather than an individual asset. It's a process to select the preferred sequence of treatments. So this means that it's considering a long-term analysis because you're going to try to look at the costs over the entire life of an asset. The life cycle planning is something that's required in the TAMP, but it also serves as a way to relate some of the conditions of your assets to other objectives that you're trying to achieve within your agency. So for example, you can use the life cycle planning to describe how improving the asset condition can help address safety or mobility or eliminate risks or something like that. Life cycle planning also supports your target setting activities, and it informs your performance gap analysis because it compares your expected performance with what your targets are set at. So it's actually a really important part of your asset management activities. The guide or the handbook also introduces some basic engineering economic analysis concepts that are used in life cycle planning. One of the things it does in this chapter is it highlights some of the differences and the similarities between the network analysis that's used in life cycle planning to the project level life cycle cost analysis that's done at the individual asset level. Both of these approaches consider a variety of treatment options over an analysis period, and they compare the differences not only in terms of the cost of those different options, but also the differences in expected performance over time. Both of them are usually constrained by costs or other factors such as minimum conditions that have to be achieved. And they both consider the fact that $100 today is worth more than $100 would be worth in 10 years due to the time value of money. One of the major differences between the life cycle planning, the network level life cycle planning, and the project level life cycle cost analysis is the number of assets that are considered and the resulting number of treatment options that are going to be analyzed in the analysis. So to do a network level analysis that considers all of these treatment choices, you really need powerful tools like the pavement management or bridge management systems that you have available in your organization. These management systems consider the current and the forecasted conditions. They determine different treatment options for every asset over every year in the analysis period using the models that you have configured in your system. They analyze all the benefits and the costs from each one of those different strategies so you can select the preferred one that best suits your objectives. The handbook discusses some of the similarities and the differences in how a pavement management system and a bridge management system might work. It talks about some of the differences in terms of performance modeling, treatment selection, and analysis approach. And one of the areas where pavement management and bridge management is different is in terms of the length of the analysis period that might be considered. When you're looking at a pavement analysis, you might use an analysis period of about 20 years because of the life of a pavement. But since bridge design life is so much longer, the analysis period that you use for a bridge analysis might be something in the neighborhood of 70 to 100 years. So very different in terms of those analysis periods. There are also chapters within the handbook that walk you through a life cycle planning analysis, one chapter for pavements and one chapter for bridges. So you can go right to the topic or right to the asset that you're most interested in. Both of the approaches, both the pavement and the bridge chapters, follow the 5-step process that was introduced in the guidance, where as the first step, you identify which asset you're talking about and what part of the network is going to be included. In step 2, you're going to determine the feasible treatment strategies that need to be considered. In step 3, you're going to introduce the constraints that you might have to deal with, whether they're budget constraints, whether minimum conditions that have to be met, or any of those. In the 4th step, you're going to bring in the financial side of things. So here's where you take those life cycle strategies and you compare different funding scenarios. And there might be a little bit of back and forth between step 2 and step 4 as you're trying to refine which strategy makes the most sense for the dollars that you expect to have available. And then the final step in the process is to bring the preferred scenario forward to your financial planning. Now, I'm more of a pavement person, so I'm going to walk you through the content of the pavement chapter. But there's a very similar chapter for bridges that's very specific to that. And both chapters are structured in the same way. So both of them include a description of the steps in the process and explain what it is that step is trying to do. It then goes through an example where it shows you how to do it. And I'm going to take just 1 minute to highlight step 2 in the process, because this is one area where I think states could enhance their life cycle planning. The objective of this step is actually to consider different treatment strategies for preserving the network, to see if an alternate strategy might have a better impact for the same dollars that you are expecting to have available. So in a pavement management system, that might mean changing your decision trees or your analysis parameters to see what the impact of those different strategies would be. And what I saw in a lot of the TAMPs that I've looked at is that many of the agencies looked at their current strategy, but they didn't really challenge themselves to see whether a different strategy might have produced different results. So in this example that's included in the guide or in the handbook, not only did we include an agency's current strategy, but we introduced 2 different strategies, one where moderate preservation might be used and another where it might be more aggressive in terms of the preservation. And as you can see from the table on the left-hand side, that meant actually changing some of the treatments that are being applied at different condition levels. Step 4 in the process is bringing those preferred life cycle planning treatment strategies forward and running them for different funding scenarios. So in this case, what you're looking at are 2 different treatment strategies. One is the current strategy and one is the moderate preservation strategy, and 4 different funding levels. As you can see from the bottom of the graphic and also in the bullets, there's 4 different strategies or scenarios ranging from $75 million up to $200 million per year. One other thing I want to point out in this slide is that you'll notice that the analysis period shown in the graphs is a 20-year analysis period. Now, I recognize that the TAMP is a 10-year document, but one of the things that we found advantageous is to actually extend your analysis period beyond the 10 years of the TAMP, because sometimes it does take a longer period of time to see the impacts of the different scenarios that you're running. This is especially true with the bridge analysis because of their longer design lives. So all of that information then, all the results from your projections are brought forward and help you determine how these all fit into your financial plan. And what this graphic illustrates are the kinds of graphs you can prepare once you have the analysis results done. So you can see what conditions can be achieved for different funding levels for the preferred strategy that you've identified or for alternate strategies. So in this particular graph, on the left, we're seeing 10-year conditions, and on the right, we're seeing 20-year conditions. And what you can do is enter the graph at any of the funding levels, $150 million a year, and you can see what the conditions would be in terms of percent good and fair on the non-NHS. The middle graph is the non-interstate NHS, and the top graph would be the interstates. So this allows you to not only set your targets, but it also lets you know if funding should change, what the impact might be on the conditions you can achieve. The handbook also includes some tips for a successful analysis that you might find helpful. It touches on some of the challenges that agencies face. For example, capturing both maintenance and capital costs in your analysis. A lot of the agencies were able to only really focus on the capital costs. And so we touch on that as an issue. And there's actually an NCHRP study that's just begun that's looking at how you can better integrate maintenance into your asset management plan. We also touch on the challenges with determining treatment effectiveness, especially if some of these treatments are new to your agency. This is especially true of some of the preservation treatments that agencies are thinking about using. And then also in terms of implementing your results and making sure that the plan strategies will actually show up or are reflected in your STIP. The handbook also includes a section on frequently asked questions or answered questions, and some suggestions for specifically improving the effectiveness of your analysis in the areas of data, models, tools, and processes. You can download the handbook using the link that I've provided, or you can just Google the FHWA's asset management website to get your copy there. So I'll go ahead and close there. Thanks a lot, and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Katie. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Suri Sadasavam. Suri is currently managing the highway infrastructure R&D practice area of WSP's advisory services. He has over 15 years of experience in applied research on various topics relating to lifecycle management of highway infrastructure, including engineering design, project delivery, construction and quality assurance, asset management, and innovation deployment. He's one of the research analysts working on the NCHRP Project 2-26 research on lifecycle planning, which he'll be sharing with us today. I'll now turn it over to Suri. We can't hear. Can you put on your audio?
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry about it, and thank you. Good afternoon or a late good morning, everyone. I'm Suri Sadasivam from WSP. I'm happy to be here. The focus of today's presentation is to provide a brief overview of the progress we have made for the NCHRP 026 research. Dr. Jagannath Malela is the principal investigator. He couldn't make it today because of a prior conflict, and as a member of his team, I'm stepping in. With this background, the objective of the NCHRP 0226 study is to develop guidance to support lifecycle planning at asset, program, and system levels with due consideration to asset condition, mobility and safety, risk and uncertainties, budget and performance constraints, and other factors. As of now, we have completed the phase 1 of this research, where we have looked at how DOTs are managing various asset classes, what information they have and do not have. We have put together a conceptual framework and performed some proof of concept work on various LCP components or elements that go into this conceptual framework. Let me share a few things within the available time. Okay. Katie just provided a great deal of information on lifecycle planning, so I'm not going to go into it further. But I would like to add a few words here. Transportation agencies have a twin objective of meeting the service delivery goals and costs to manage these assets. And meeting this twin objective requires careful consideration of what the goals are, what condition the asset would be in, what work needs to be performed on an asset at any given point of time, while maintaining a whole life perspective, and most of all, what can be achieved within available funding. And as you know, LCP can be applied at 3 levels for treatment selection at this asset level. And as we roll them up to develop a program of projects using prioritization or optimization to maximize the performance of that asset class at a network level, and to develop a portfolio of projects across highway assets or even across transportation modes to maximize the performance of the transportation system. While we are making progress with the implementation of cross-asset or cross-modal optimization, we can leverage some opportunities to strengthen the LCP framework and articulate the same in the next version of the TAM. So we set out with these objectives and scope of LCP, and at the project level in our approach, LCP should identify the optimum preservation strategy to under a given investment scenario, which all agencies do for lifecycle management. Within this, the key differentiator is the period over which the treatments are optimized for selection, whether it's over like a shorter term like 5 or 10 years or over a whole life. And we also thought about whether LCP should apply to all activities right after construction, through reconstruction, which is what the overall TAM practice typically focuses on now, or should we include design and construction as well? And our suggestion is to start thinking about including design and construction because many factors that influence the performance of an asset are determined in the design stage. And our goal is to optimize the service expectancy, and cost begins that in the design stage. And at the network level, LCP helps to determine how much investments would be required to achieve the performance targets, and again with no consideration to budget constraints at this moment. And and then as we bring in the funding or investment scenarios, we understand what level of performance can be achieved with a given scenario, and like how can we use this to make a case for preservation funding and financial planning. And as again Katie mentioned, many states rely on their asset management systems like payment management or bridge management, which contain optimization routines, like to do this activity under a constrained funding or performance scenario. And here too, we realize that the time scale over which the optimization can be applied is a key maturity differentiator, like as we evolve further. Okay, to help with today's discussion, please let me introduce two conceptual framework, one to perform a life cycle planning and other to incorporate risks into the LCP process. I mean, these are separated this way, both LCP and risks, because both are vast topics and have rich and copious amounts of work reported in the literature. And in reality, risk considerations are an integral part of life cycle planning. And to put it other way, we view a life cycle planning is about balancing cost, performance, and risks to the extent possible. This slide is the schematic of the proposed LCP framework and high-level steps. It's no different from what what you have been doing. The first step is about setting up the analysis with your policies, data, models, and tools to establish performance measures or thresholds, deterioration models, costs, so on. We select a group of homogeneous assets for a given asset class. The next high-level step is to forecast the time points at which the asset is expected to be considered deficient, and therefore an intervention will be needed. Then we evaluate all feasible strategies, develop a sequence of treatments considering asset condition, utilization or demand, and risks, and to evaluate the benefits and costs of each treatment. And as this activity culminates with the selection of a preferred alternative at the asset level, the next high-level step begins at the network level with an unconstrained list. And as this process or as this list undergoes ranking, prioritization, and optimization, we develop a draft work program, and this work program is evaluated, if necessary, tweaked, and then or refined. And then the resulting work program is reported for financial planning. And as I said before, this conceptual framework is no different from what transportation agencies do now, and it cannot be for matters of implementation and practicality. But the degree in the sophistication to which this process is carried out depends on the TAM maturity of the agencies doing it, as well as the maturity for the asset class for which it can be done. So we went ahead. This schematic is a generalized lifecycle activity plan that, again, we all are familiar with. The outcome of this activity plan is, as I said, is a preferred treatment type that meets with the definition, that is that it will produce the lowest lifecycle cost while delivering service at desirable levels. And you can see there are like 13 circles in this schematic, and these are the LCP enablers. I mean, most of them are enablers or inputs to the LCP process. And all these enablers are important to the LCP process. The blue circles indicate that we have already, we already have good information um, on these enablers. The orange ones are those that we considered would need, some additional focus and development. Like for instance, and at least for payments and bridges, most agencies have good condition measures to capture what they need, deterioration models for condition forecasting, and decision trees and so on. And similarly, earlier NCHRP research, NCHRP report 713 has developed guidance on developing service life expectancy values, and and there is good guidance on user cost models. However, the DOTs may need some additional guidance or tools, or policies on enablers like end of life criteria, how to ensure that the thresholds that you use would result or truly result in um, lowest life cycle costs, or or how to handle the variability of models. So we took uh, all these requirements and organized them into different research questions. And like for the presentation purposes, we simplified them into 10 research questions. And we came up with these research questions based on the review of your TAM plans and and other additional documents and stuff. So we have developed guidance under the NCHRP research for most of them to date, and by by end of this research, guidance will be developed for all of them. And here are some of the key research questions that the current phase of the project focused on. What principles should we use to intervene? Is there an end of life condition state for assets, and what is it? And what is a window of opportunity, and how can we operationalize it? Um, Again, our thresholds for performance measures, um, you know, like uh, um, set arbitrarily, or would they truly result in lowest life cycle costs, or how should we set them? And these are some of the research questions we developed. Let me give you just an example here. This is an example with the end of life condition state. And from an LCP perspective, asset replacement is something to contend with, because replacement is a very expensive event and an intensive event too from a traffic disruption perspective. But often replacement decisions are made not based on asset condition factors alone. Many other factors come into play in reality. It could be due to safety or capacity needs, obsolescence, or the need to upgrade to current design standards. It could be vulnerability and resilience, economics, or a combination of factors. For instance, bridge factors are replaced for traffic capacity reasons, and it's not uncommon to see pavement reconstruction during lane additions, or operational changes on freeways. And some other assets like rockfall protection systems can may need replacement based on an assessment of asset criticality and vulnerability. And therefore, LCP process should define what the end of life condition state is and capture the factors that might drive and decisions using appropriate performance measures like mobility risk scores. And earlier I talked about incorporating risks and uncertainties. The quantitative analysis of life cycle planning as practiced today with all the component models and like for condition or service life represents a deterministic and a happy path scenario. And in real world, the lifecycle management is fraught with uncertainties, risks and uncertainties. And these threats impede our ability to achieve the core objectives of lifecycle planning. In the interest of time, I'm just going to skip to the next slide. So, and to understand the types of risks that are of interest to LCP, we reviewed risk registers of many state DOT TAMs and distilled them further. And the list on the left side shows major risks types that were gleaned from the synthesis from the TAM plans, and the list on the side shows the distilled ones. These three risk categories are of interest to to the LCP process. One is asset or service failure risks, which could result from accelerated deterioration or catastrophic asset failure. The second one is the inherent variability of input factors that would affect the precision of anticipated outcomes. And the third one is related to funding. And in our research, we will be covering each of these risk types more in a detailed fashion. And okay, this is the proposed risks. We realized that the first risk type, that's asset or service failure risks from accelerated deterioration, we can call it as slow changing but gradual and persistent impacts, or catastrophic asset failure from extreme weather. So we thought that the asset or service failure risks could be more critical at this point, or there is more guidance necessary there. So we came up with a framework to include risks into lifecycle planning, and you might have come across different flavors of risk management, but the underlying framework remains the same. We took the underlying themes from these frameworks and refined them to make it work for the LCP process. And regardless of whether adaptation planning is carried out as a part of routine treatment planning exercise or a standing type exercise, the basic engineering and economic principles will remain the same. And in our framework, we postulate that the LCP should adapt the concept of proportionate, or would adapt the concept of proportionate adaptation. That is, not to over adapt or under adapt, but commensurate with threats. We recognize that many resilience studies are currently underway, and most DOTs currently lack production-ready analytical models to incorporate them in the LCP process. But this is, the future work should focus on developing analytical models to forecast threats and also to help with the engineering-based vulnerability analysis. In the interim, our study will explore formulating a simple methodology, that can be that's practical with what we have, and can be operationalized as, and also that's something that would build on records and studies that you have carried over. And with that, let me complete, and thank you for the opportunity, and sorry that I overran it by 5 minutes.
No problem. Thanks, Suri. Now we'll hear from Ken Valentine. Ken currently serves in the Asset Management Bureau of the Vermont Agency of Transportation, or VTrans, where he's worked in various roles for 26 years. Prior to his current position, he has served as Deputy Director of Maintenance and Operations, Fleet Manager, Pavement Management Engineer, Planning Coordinator, and Hydraulics Engineer. He holds a degree in Civil Engineering from Tufts University and a master's degree in Geology from the University of Wyoming. He lives and, for the moment, works in East Montpelier with his wife, their 3 college-age children, and 3 black labs asleep by the wood stove. Okay, I have the image of you, Ken, now. I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, very
Great.
clearly.
Perfect. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Today, I want to talk a little bit about Vermont's experience and expectation with improving life cycle planning and management within our TAM. Well, what improvements are we making? Well, we all have TAMPs, and I think the theory is well understood by those of us in the business. And in general, I think we've done a good job communicating that theory to people. In preparing this talk, I thought about improvements Vermont might be making in life cycle planning that would be any different from the good practices that other states are implementing. When I think about improving our TAMP, I think about the progress that we're making moving from theory to implementation, in large part because I think it's implementation that's going to allow and in fact encourage us to make incremental improvements to our plans. I'll talk for just a moment about our asset management foundation, where we're starting from. Vermont, like a lot of states, has a long tradition of good pavement management. We have some good staff in key positions over the years. Good practices have been institutionalized, and the idea of preserving good pavements is recognized and even appreciated by our in-house staff, by our legislature, and even by informed members of the public. And we're certainly fortunate that that's the case. Our bridge management system is good, but still developing. Even without that system fully mature, the concept of embracing preservation and rehabilitation strategies to maximize service lives is not a hard sell for us. I think about some of our interstate bridge deck replacement projects. They're certainly good ambassadors for the idea, in that even the untrained public sees that it makes sense to replace a bad bridge deck, but salvage the substructure underneath it if it still has life in it. We recognize that what we need to do moving forward is first to ensure that our bridge program matures to the same state as our paving program. Second, to ensure that our other assets follow the same path. And third, to ensure that our budgeting process, our budgeting decisions really are driven by asset management principles. And I realize that a lot of states are probably somewhere on the same continuum. So I said I was going to talk about implementation. What does that implementation look like for us? Well, Vermont has 5 efforts underway to make that happen, each of which I'll talk about briefly. The first is a management commitment to connect asset management principles to the purse strings. The second is VAMIS, which I'll explain. The third is VPSP2, which I'll also explain. The fourth is coordination and integration with our maintenance forces. And the fifth is coordination within our highway corridors. And I'll certainly admit that some of this is still aspirational for us. First and foremost, within the past few years, we've had a renewed management commitment that our asset management section acts as the gatekeeper for all highway spending in Vermont. That doesn't mean we have absolute control over things, but we do have an important seat at the table. Critically, it's the asset management group that assembles projects into our proposed budgets, so we really do have the opportunity to shape investment decisions. And while there's inevitably some nibbling around the edges of the proposed budgets we come up with, what gets implemented usually ends up being pretty close to our original proposals. The second and very important aspect of our implementation efforts is VAMIS. VAMIS stands for the Vermont Asset Management Information System. It's an integrated application to standardize our asset management approach across asset classes. It's being developed with Dayton, whose software has formed the foundation of our pavement management for decades. And that familiarity gives us some confidence that we can make it work across our other assets as well. Our VAMIS project is still underway, but the development process is proving valuable in that now we're taking a common approach across all our assets with similar logic to all of our strategies. We're actually identifying things like treatment costs, triggers, and deterioration curves. Now, for many asset classes, particularly our secondary asset classes, we've had an idea about these over the years, but we really hadn't rigorously documented or analyzed them. One aspect that we're really looking forward to is to have a work order system that will better allow us to assign work and track what gets done to our assets. And we're hopeful that eventually we'll have some meaningful cross-asset allocation analyses. We all know that's the holy grail of our work, and it will allow us to bring some objective data to the difficult conversations among stakeholders competing for finite resources. Of course, today we're talking about TAMP improvements, and I'm actually hopeful that our next TAMP document could largely be a portal to our VAMIS data that would help make it a living document rather than just a snapshot. The next effort I'll talk about is our VPSP2 project. Admittedly, that's a little bit awkwardly named. We talk about that periodically. VPSP2 is the Vermont Project Selection and Prioritization Process. Some of you may have seen Chad Allen, my recently retired former supervisor, give an in-depth presentation on this subject in a webinar a couple of months ago. There are a lot of aspects to our VPSP2 project, but what's critical for this discussion is that it recognizes that new projects must be balanced and considered in coordination with our asset-driven projects. And that's important because I think, as all of you know, much of the public naturally thinks of transportation dollars as a chance to do something new, whereas we all know it's expensive just to take care of what we already have. But that said, it's actually, the processes work both ways in that it forces some of us in the asset management business to acknowledge that people really do expect some shiny new toys in exchange for their tax dollars. But there is an emphasis on good asset management principles built into the design of VPSP2. Asset preservation projects have their own streamlined on-ramp to our project lists, and even projects identified by other means are scored in large part by the extent to which they preserve the network. VPSP2 assigns potential projects a transportation value score that's made up of the 8 criteria shown here. And as you can see, asset condition is one of them that's weighed heavily. It's in fact weighed as heavily as safety. The asset condition criteria used here is a measurement of the extent to which the proposed project is really the right treatment at the right time. Typically, that means we're taking advantage, not missing opportunities for preservation. Internally, we're also making a renewed effort to coordinate the asset preservation work done on the project side of our organization with the preservation work that's done by our maintenance forces. This means initiating, coordinating, and tracking asset preservation efforts through a single process, no matter who ends up doing the work. We hope to do so through the use of the work orders that I mentioned in the VAMIS slide, and by building and tracking our maintenance budget using the same definitions and language as our contracted projects. The goal ultimately is to better track what preservation work gets done, and in fact, what does not get done. That's especially true with the preservation work that's funded through our maintenance sections. Our good intentions for preservation work are often at the risk of being deferred when we have a severe winter, which happens, of course, periodically. Finally, we're seeking to think outside of our traditional silos and produce corridor plans as projects are being conceived, what we're calling new project summaries. This is helping to ensure that asset preservation gets done across a broad range of asset classes in a coordinated way. We recognize that our most established paving and bridge projects will often serve as the drivers among our projects, but within them, we will thoughtfully consider the inclusion of some secondary asset projects to ensure they too are managed rather than pushed to the back burner as we've had a habit of doing over the years. So what are we doing to improve lifecycle planning within our TAMP? I hope I've described 5 efforts that we're making focused on implementation. Hopefully these are going to continue to develop and become institutionalized over the next 5 years or so. The takeaway that I wanted to share here is that an improved lifecycle plan is one that describes good practices in action. So you can wish us good luck with that. And I can take some questions now, or I can take them at the end if that's what you prefer.
Yeah, I think if people have questions, if they could put them into the questions section of the menu bar, then we'll take them at the end.
That would be
Thanks.
great. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Ken, for that great presentation. Now
Thank
we're
you.
going to hear from Thor Anderson. Thor is the Performance Asset Manager in the Arizona Department of Transportation's Multimodal Planning Division. His responsibilities include the development of performance targets for 16 federally required performance measures and the long-term planning for the management of the state highway infrastructure. He also oversees the pavement management section. Thor's been at ADOT since 1993 and has held a variety of positions, including manager of the environmental planning group and manager of the construction products evaluation program. I'll turn it over to Thor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you, Hyana. And hello, everyone. So ADOT practices lean management. So we're on a continuous improvement journey. And of course, we're relatively new to lifecycle analysis, so that's provided us a lot of opportunities for improvement. We're currently updating our TAMP. So here are some of the improvements that we've either implemented or are working on. Accurate lifecycle analysis requires accurate data, and we've had some challenges with both our bridge and pavement data. The challenge with the bridge data has to do with variances between our component level and element level inspections. Most of you know the bridge components are the deck, superstructure, and substructure, and the elements are individual parts of the bridge like girders. While we've been performing component level inspections for a long time, we didn't begin performing elemental level inspections until 2014. When we began using our bridge management system in 2018, we realized that the analysis output didn't match the National Bridge Inventory ratings. An investigation revealed that bridge inspectors were rating the elements and components by slightly different standards. This is important because for accuracy, we're using the element ratings for lifecycle analysis, but the MBI and our performance metrics are based on the component ratings. Since our bridge management system internally converts the element level analysis output to a component rating for planning purposes, we need to ensure that the element and the component data match. To address this problem, we've held training for our bridge inspectors and we've improved our quality control practices. Since bridge inspections are on a 2-year cycle, it's taken a while, but we're beginning to see the benefit of these changes. In 2017, we began to collect pavement condition data using an automated pavement data collection van. This involved using different methodologies than we previously used, and we found that the new data did not correlate well with our historical data. At the time, we were trying to develop deterioration models for our new pavement management system. We decided not to use the historical data for this effort, so we had to develop the models with just 2 years of automated data. Of course, having more data makes for a more robust model. With this in mind, we plan to update our deterioration models when we have about 5 years of automated data. One of the questions we had when we started to look at risk was how to incorporate it into lifecycle analysis. When we developed our bridge and pavement management systems, we wanted to make sure that some of the risk factors would be included in the analysis. The approach we took with our bridge management system was to incorporate risk into our utility formula. We identified 4 bridge risks and gave them a weighting of 10% of the utility formula. Some of the factors that come into that weighting are also in other parts of the formula, and so they have a higher overall weighting than shown here. We just wanted to make sure that these risks were given a special priority. For pavement, we sat down with the pavement and geotech sections and went through every mile of pavement on the state highway system. We identified risks and rated the risks by frequency and consequence. The risk scores for the 3 most prominent risks were incorporated into the cost-benefit formula with a weighting of 25%. The pavement management system also accounts for these risks in another way. If a project with one of these risks is performed, the software will only restore the full benefit for the treatment if the risk is addressed in the project. If the risk isn't addressed, only a partial benefit is received. Prior to performing lifecycle analysis, we were pretty loosey-goosey with our work type definitions, especially between maintenance and preservation. Oftentimes, if our maintenance forces did a treatment, it was called maintenance. And if the same treatment came out of our development process, it was called preservation. So one of our first steps in developing our lifecycle analysis was to clearly define and standardize what treatment belongs in what work type category, and make sure that this information was consistent from planning all the way through programming and construction. We still need to work with our local NHS owners to use this format, since the work type definitions are critical to tie together analysis, implementation, and measurement. Treatment costs can change significantly from the planning stage to the final design stage, particularly when ancillary scope is added to a project. This can result in last-minute changes to the STIP, since projects are sometimes removed to adjust for cost overruns, and of course that can affect the implementation of our investment strategies. We do add a contingency percentage to the planning level treatment costs programmed into our management systems to compensate for ancillary scope, but it's generic and often inaccurate. We're addressing this issue by undertaking a planning level scoping process for rehabilitations and reconstructions before they go into the STIP. The scoping process is sufficiently detailed to nail down the treatment selection and to include the most common ancillary costs, leading to more accurate programming process and better adherence to our investment strategies. We also plan to use the available planning level scoping cost when we prepare our lifecycle analysis to get a more accurate projection of the work that we can do. Additionally, we are reevaluating and updating our contingency percentage for our management system treatment costs to improve the accuracy of our long-term projections. Integrating maintenance into our asset management practice is clearly an area we need to improve. Right now, our maintenance allocations in the TAMP are based on historical trends rather than a forward-looking analysis and management strategy. As we begin to contemplate an approach to evolve our practice, we're considering questions such as, for routine maintenance like bridge washing, do we have a systematic strategy that's being consistently applied statewide? If not, how do we go about developing uniform standards? How do we get buy-in from our relatively autonomous maintenance district to apply those standards consistently throughout the state? And is this particular activity adequately funded? Reactive maintenance, such as pothole or storm damage repair, brings up questions like how will extreme weather affect our future maintenance budget needs? Or if funding for preservation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction is reduced, how much additional maintenance money will be needed to keep up with reactive maintenance due to increased asset deterioration? We also need to consider how we assign a benefit to maintenance treatments. For instance, bridge washing may help extend the overall life of a bridge, but it doesn't improve the current bridge condition rating. This makes the benefit difficult to account for in the management system software. So we're likely to have to develop another means of illustrating and conveying the benefits of maintenance treatments to stakeholders. We have a lot to do in this area, and we feel it's going to take several years to fully integrate maintenance into our asset management practice. This past spring, we implemented our pavement management system. So we've been on a big learning curve since then. When we actually started running pavement analysis, we noticed that the good condition was improving faster than expected. We believe that this is because the hypothetical treatment benefit reset that we applied to the deterioration model doesn't accurately reflect the actual post-treatment condition that would be measured in the field. It looks like the problem only applies to surface treatments like chip seals. For example, we would expect a field measurement of a chip seal condition a couple months after application to have a big improvement in the cracking metric, but the IRI may not improve as much because of all those chips. So while the hypothetical benefit might reset the pavement condition from fair to good in the software analysis, the actual condition may still only be fair. We have a research project underway to help us address this problem, and we plan to begin doing some field testing of recently applied surface treatments to ascertain if we're getting the benefit that we assign to that treatment in the model. We plan to use this information as input for future updates of our deterioration models. In the meantime, we're going to proceed with caution, recognizing that the model may be overstating our good condition pavements. We recognize that when we configured our treatment decision trees for the management system, that we would have to do periodic updates. One of the areas that we're going to have another look at is pavement reconstruction. ADOT's roadways are relatively young, and we don't do very much reconstruction. So this treatment is optional in our current decision tree. Since rehab is always the cheaper option, the software always selects that option. However, we can see that eventually we'll reach a law of decreasing returns on the number of rehabs we can do to a pavement. So we have a goal of determining how many rehabs we can do for a pavement family before reconstruction is a more cost-effective option. Then we'll update our treatment decision tree to reflect the outcome of this investigation. Our basic conclusion is that we're going to have to review and update all of the inputs to the management system regularly. Arizona has 31 local governments that own NHS assets. In January, we held our first meeting with the locals where we gave them an overview of the regulation, shared inventory and condition information with them, and discussed some of the steps that will need to be needed to include local NHS assets in our lifecycle analysis. This slide lists some of the steps that we need to do to get the locals integrated into the TAMP. We're going to put an implementation timeline for these steps in the TAMP update we're currently working on. A lesson learned from our first TAMP is that we didn't build in a transition period in our investment strategies for the adoption of a new way of doing business. We weren't able to adjust our transportation program as quickly as we had hoped. And so in our TAMP update, we're phasing in our investment strategies over time, and we expect this to be a more successful approach. We've also learned that a longer analysis period gives a much better picture of predicted performance. We're including a 25-year analysis period in our TAMP update. This matches the horizon of our long-range transportation plan, so we can see how the funding allocations in that plan play out over time. And the analysis we perform in the TAMP update will be used to support decision-making for our next long-range plan update. This is important because the decisions made in the long-range plan actually end up constraining what you can actually do in the medium-range TAMP. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Matt. Are you going to take this on? You're muted, Matt.
Sorry. Welcome, everybody. Sorry that I was late. I was doing another meeting, but now is time for the Q&A. So as Yana said, if you have questions, please type them in. We do have a few that have been asked so far, so I will go ahead and sort of ask those of some of the panelists. So the first one is for Katie Zimmerman. Oh, and those that don't know me, I'm Matt Hardy. I'm the Program Director for Planning and Performance Management here at AASHTO, counterpart to Steve Gay at FHWA. So thanks, Yana, for covering my opening remarks and everything. And thank you to all the panelists for participating today.
Can all the panelists just put your cameras on so that you're visible, including you, Steve?
So some of these questions will be directed at one person, but if anybody has anything to add, please, add to them. So the first one is came in for Katie, but again, if anybody has anything to add to it, please add on. What are recommended asset software products that are created specifically, or can I guess do the life cycle sort of planning or analysis well?
Thanks, Matt. So I'm not sure I want to specifically recommend any particular products, but let me share maybe some experiences. I think from a bridge side, I've seen the AASHTO products seem to be very popular. The BRM seems to be very widely used within agencies, but I've also seen some agencies start to use proprietary tools like the Dayton or the Agile Assets programs for their bridge analysis. On the pavement side, we see more of the use of the proprietary systems. I think there are three that I've seen most often at the state level. The Dayton, the Agile Assets, and the Stantec tools seem to be the three that are most popular. But I would say all of these tools, and even some of the public domain tools that are out there, have the capability of doing the life cycle analysis. I would say that the challenge is in configuring these systems to make them work the way that they should be working. And so that's where I think the big effort goes in.
Thanks, Katie. That was a very politically correct answer, not favoring one over the other. That's good.
Well,
Yana, sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just going to ask Steve, is there a document that's available that identifies tools that are out there?
I know we developed one, it's over 10 years ago now, and to the best of my knowledge, we do not have plans to updating it in the near future. Sorry.
And I know that has been a topic, I guess, just sort of the AASHTO subcommittee on asset management is, having sort of like a vendor showcase at some point, and just trying to ask the vendors to sort of come in and, have a webinar like this where the vendors can kind of, showcase their products and their services and their tools, and then the state DOTs or locals could sort of participate in that, sort of ask questions, and it could be sort of an open, safe environment that everybody could sort of participate in. And I mean, if that sounds like, I'd be curious to know if sort of the people on the webinar today would find that sort of webinar to be useful or interesting or of value. We could sort of add it on, perhaps as a AASHTO sort of webinar event. I don't know, Thor, Ken, Suri, anything else to add in terms of products or tools that y'all are using, I guess at the state level, or Suri from the supporting other states and other locals? Saying no is fine.
Well, we are using the AASHTO-aware BRM for our bridges. So I feel secure in a meeting that's co-sponsored by AASHTO to say that.
We thank you for that, I guess. All right. Next question here. All right, we have some more coming in. So this one is directed towards you, Ken. When using the VPSP2, are preservation projects generally programmed in advance based on the asset's age, or closer to construction based on the condition deterioration rate of the asset?
Well, that's a good question, and frankly, it's a process that's just starting now. So we haven't done much to date. We're sort of scrambling now to kick that off. But the asset preservation projects that will be fed into our VPSP2 projects are the ones that are going to come out of our regular management systems. So it's not a new way to identify things. It's really a way to help implement some of the systems that we have and the ones that are developing, and to integrate the projects that come out of those systems for recommendations with things like projects that the communities are clamoring for, or projects that are identified for safety reasons, and eventually we hope to use it to do some comparison even among different modes that may come in through very different processes. So we're trying to develop that system in a way that complements our regular management systems, which are developing concurrently.
Great, thanks for that. For Thor, how were risks identified that were included in your system based on experience or from data analyses?
Well, really based on experience and frequency. We really looked at how often the things happened and what the big impacts were. And a lot of our risks are associated with extreme weather and flooding. So we always make sure to include that in our risk analysis. So mainly it was frequency and consequence of the risk.
Okay, great.
Yeah, let me jump in for a second there, Matt.
Go ahead, Steve.
Federal Highway, and which recently undertook a pilot project with Arizona DOT on life cycle planning for pavements, and it gets into some of the items that Thor mentioned, and I'm hoping the report is available in the next couple of months.
Okay. So last question that we have right now is, again, if you have any questions for the panels, please type them in. It goes back to Katie. Can you give us a couple of examples of how asset condition can be related to other objectives or measures or areas such as safety or mobility?
Sure. So in my presentation, I mentioned that the handbook talks a little bit about how life cycle planning can be linked to some of these other objectives that an agency might set. So an easy safety one, if there is an area where you have continuing or high numbers of wet weather accidents, for example, there are certain kinds of surface treatments that you can apply that would improve the friction characteristics and minimize the number of wet weather accidents. So in a corridor like that, you might have a very different life cycle strategy than you would in another corridor where that's not as much of a problem. If you're focusing on mobility, a couple of examples that come to mind immediately. One would be using treatments that reduce the closure time for repairs so that there's less impact on the public in terms of the commute and the delays that occur. Perhaps there's something if you're tracking your ITS assets. You might set up a life cycle strategy for those to make sure that they are being replaced or in good working order on a more regular basis to keep traffic moving more smoothly. We worked with one agency that included ITS assets in their TAMP, and they found that many of their cameras and their other devices were much older than the manufacturer's recommended service life. So addressing those kinds of things would be another way that you could set up a strategy that repairs those among your heavily trafficked corridors. And one other thing that comes to mind, geotechnical asset management. That's another type of asset that you might need to manage. And I'm regularly hearing Steve talk about examples where if you have a corridor where you have regular landslides or something like that, a life cycle strategy focused on addressing those geotechnical hazards would be something that would improve mobility. So by looking at strategies for different types of assets, you can actually influence some of your other objectives.
That's a good, I know here in the Washington, D.C. area, the Maryland State Highway Administration is putting stickier pavement basically on the northwest section to try to address a number of, serious truck crashes and stuff that happen on our beltway that, cause a lot of impacts, travel and stuff like that a lot. So I know that's one sort of example, I guess, here in the DC region. So Thor, Ken, Suri, did you want to sort of add to that or anything?
Matt, this is Suri. I would like to add to what
Sure.
Katie said. Another way to relate condition with safety or mobility impacts is, I'm just going to kind of build on what she said about the geotechnical assets. The asset condition makes there is a direct correlation between asset condition and vulnerability of the asset. So, the poorer the asset condition is, more vulnerable the asset is. So even if the threat is, if even an impending threat is small enough, if the asset is in poor condition, it could create like adverse safety and mobility consequences. And you could see that in the risk scoring that Thor showed us with expansive soils and pavements or scour rating.
Great. Thanks, Suri. Next question, directed towards, I guess, Thor and Ken. For pavements, did you have historical information for when to do the next treatment, or did you rely on some of the textbook timeframes? Comes from Tammy Haas in New Mexico, DOT.
We used historical information based on the professional judgment of our pavement staff.
We use historical information that's been just monitored over a whole lot of years to see what kind of treatments on what kind of road beds last for how long. It's something that we sort of constantly monitor and try to sleuth out when we need to adjust those and when we don't. But yeah, we're definitely using historical information.
All right, thanks. This one I think I might direct towards Steve and or Katie. It comes from Steve Wilcox. It's more of a sort of I would say sort of an intellectual question. So he asked, how many states are really doing life cycle planning? And he says, I would call what we do for pavements is based on condition and windows of opportunity, assuming the asset is perpetual. There was a lot of discussion of treating bridges as perpetual using super maintenance strategies, and he gives the Brooklyn Bridge as an example. Can you discuss? So not putting y'all on the spot, but maybe, I don't know, thoughts or ideas about that coming from Steve. Again, this is a safe space, so we are recording it, but it is a safe space.
And we have how many minutes till the webinar is done? That's 3. A big question. So I'll take maybe what Steve would view as the cop-out answer, because there's not a lot of time to go into it. But I would say that yes, we are practicing life cycle planning, but we're in the early stages of life cycle planning, I think. And I think that as both Ken and Thor mentioned, there are things we could do to improve the practices that we're having. Or that we're using. So like being able to incorporate some of these other things, safety considerations in the life cycle planning, looking at different life cycle strategies for different corridors, for example, that is a different level of maturity for life cycle planning than I think a lot of agencies are using. So maybe the NCHRP research that WSP is working on is something that will take us in that direction. But so that's my quick little cop-out answer, but we don't have time to go into more of what Steve raised, unless Steve Gay wants to add.
I'll add something, and it certainly is a cop-out answer. Is from what I'm hearing, and y'all can all jump in, on the bridge side, there has not been life cycle planning per se, for example, with preservation data in there, where you really have a good historical data on what you're getting out of particular treatments. And I'll say, with the case of bridge issues, in the term that Katie brought up earlier, and I've heard from an eastern state and a western state in the last couple of weeks. Hey, they're working with their new bridge management system, and there are configuration issues. And it's going to take a while to get it right. So this, as they're trying to do the life cycle planning, I believe that the asset managers have to have the bridge staff start running data now, and are there issues that can be addressed to better address the life cycle planning issues. Now I'm going to say the same thing on the pavement side. I believe as we went through the last set of TAMPs in 2019, about 10 state DOTs said, yes, they were doing life cycle planning, but they were procuring new pavement management systems. And I raised the question, what does that mean? Does it mean that they're gonna, what data? Is it gonna be an easy transfer from one system to the next? And they probably have the new management systems so they can do better life cycle planning. So it's a work in progress. And with that in mind, I think state DOTs and Well, those supplying them, you know, the companies that Katie mentioned earlier, are they better trying to address life cycle planning in their programs? And I go to state DOTs to go back at them. Are they giving you what you want them to do? You know, are they addressing all your needs? Back to you, Matt.
Thanks, Steve.
Anyone to add?
So I think with that, we are 3:30. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Those are good answers. I think, you know, life cycle planning, perhaps you kind of view it where we were with asset management, you know, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, or performance management, you know, just 7 years ago, you know, when we're just sort of getting into it. So are we really doing it? Perhaps not, but we're starting it. And, you know, over time, it's going to evolve and improve and become sort of a, you know, a part of just regular business practices that we do every day. So with that, I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists. I know that we ask a lot of you, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure those that are on the webinar as well appreciate the time, effort, and information that you gave or presented today. So we will be back next week, number 50. I think I might bake a cake or something like that and kind of eat it as we are, you know, having the webinar. But it's going to be on improving risk management and resiliency. So I would encourage you to come back for that one. And I think it's going to be, you know, same bat channel, same bat time, right? So Wednesday at 2 o'clock Eastern. You can go to the all-important TAM portal, TAM-portal.com. and you can get more information about it. Again, I know I haven't said enough today, but it's TAM portal, TAM-portal.com. And at some point, I think in early March, we're going to be releasing a new TAM portal that's better integrated with our performance management portal and also our risk management portal. So look for more information about that. And if ever you want to get more information about asset management from the AASHTO perspective, send me an email. We have regular meetings between TRB and AASHTO on asset management with our various committees and everything. So that's how we're keeping that dialogue going. And again, so thanks to everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, all that good stuff. And we will see you next week at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.